So as we've been reporting in the news this morning, the National Institute for Communicable Diseases has reported 1,436 new COVID-19 infections in the country. And this, of course, over the latest 24-hour reporting period. And it keeps the country's positivity rate at 5.5%. And the recovery rate is now at 96.8%. Now, these low numbers of infections have once again brought to the fore calls for the national state of disaster to be done away with. And this as several countries have dropped all, if not most, restrictions for now. And in South Africa, while some restrictions have been relaxed, mask wearing, for example, is still compulsory. So to discuss some of these developments, we're joined by Professor Ramneek Ahluwalia, who's a health expert and CEO of Higher Health. Prof, always a pleasure having you with us. Good morning and welcome to Morning Live once more.
An absolute honor, Sakina, and good morning to everyone. Thank you for having me.
So, Prof, with the seemingly lower numbers of daily infections, and, you know, we can actually gauge that because we speak to these numbers every day. And if you think about what's happening at the moment, we look at the number of deaths reported, and they've been in a single digit, apart from what is known as the excess deaths that are audited that come on every day. Do you think that calls to scrap the state of disaster at this point are actually justified?
I would frame it not to scrape the national state of disaster, but to rework the national state of disaster. Those calls are absolutely essential. For example, now what we have clearly seen is that the three things that are very supportive, one is mask wearing and the other one is ventilation. So if you are in an open space, you are outside your room, which is not in a congregation of settings, there is no need for a mask unless you are in a very crowded space. A very crowded space means that you are highly exposed to another individual who can and has a high potential to transmit the virus, considering we now know it's an airborne disease. So in open spaces, there is no need for mask unless it's very crowded and you are in a very crowded zone in open ventilation. Even in closed congregations, if there's a well-ventilated room and you are not a lot of people, is not overcrowding, you can go away with mask. But in a closed congregation where ventilation is low, this crowd, mask wearing still remains a very essential and a critical enabler of fighting this virus. So I think to say if we scrape the national state of disaster, but the public health advice, which is how does this mask really still help in preventing the virus to move from one person to the other, still remains an essential factor in order once we still find ourselves in the COVID pandemic. So I think there are needs to be tweaked into the national state of disaster. We can remove the national state of disaster and put it into our Occupational Health and Safety Act or strengthening our Health Act in general, which will help in making sure that the public is aware that now we understand how this virus moves from one individual to the other. It's your choice now. If you see in all the Western world or the other countries which are now talking about removing masks or other parameters that we used to put or enforce during the early stages of the pandemic, yes, the warning still remains that crowded places, closed congregations, less ventilated places, mask plays a very central role in defeating this virus. So I think tweaking the national state of disaster is the right answer rather than scraping it. If we are removing it, then making sure that the Health Act, making sure that the Occupational Health and Safety Act puts these parameters of ventilation and mask in combination to assist people from not contracting this virus.
So, Prof, if we look at the current variant in circulation, what is the dominant variant at the moment? Because, you know, I think the last time we spoke, we were still talking about Omicron. Have there been any further developments in terms of variants? And how potent are they at this point? Because this is where we start to ask, should we be letting our guard down or should we still be cautious?
We find ourselves in a very interesting times, Sakina. The first part is currently the first question is we have a sister variant So the Omicron has mutated and developed a small little variation. It's still Omicron, but a sister of an Omicron. It's the same offspring of Omicron, which we call as B.8.2, which has slightly changed its shape and color. It has become more transmissible. The good thing is it has not become more virulent. So that's the current dominant variant we find ourselves in South Africa and predominantly globally. So we all knew Omicron, when it came in the fourth wave, overshadowed the Delta wave because it had that kind of capacity, because it became more transmissible as a variant. But at this moment, it has mutated. But what the world is seeing is a mutation of the Omicron in itself, which is still less virulent, less pathogenic, and that's been circulating around the world and in South Africa. But what the world needs to watch out, and why we say we find ourselves in interesting times, is we need to look at the three important factors. The first factor is this is a mutating virus, an invisible enemy. No scientist can ever predict what this virus mutation will look like in the next phase of its mutations. But what we are definitely knowing is that this virus mutates, which means it's an airborne disease. It moves from one individual to the other very easily. What it does, it keeps moving from one individual to the other till it finds a human body of its liking. What it means is it goes inside the human body, the body which is maybe immunosuppressed or has a chronic infection, doesn't give that much strong fight to the virus. The virus likes that human genetics. Sits down, not a fault of any human, it's what virus likes. It just sits down and then it starts understanding our immune system, our first line of defense, our second or third line of defense, and starts changing its shape and color. Because all this virus will keep trying to do is it also wants to survive. And the only way it can survive is by entering into a human body and eating from our human cells, likes to bind our human cells. So for its survival, it has to change its color and its shape. And because it's a mutating virus, it can do it. It has the potential to do it. And then it what it changes its color and shape is so that when it goes to another human body, it becomes invisible, which means our first, second, third of line do not recognize it because it gives us enough time for it to bind, eat, multiply in multiple number. We call this as viral load. And that exactly makes it spread faster. And so this is what the virus is trying to do. But what we are seeing now is, which is the second factor, is that 70% of the world population, South African population, which we see clearly, has acquired some immune system, which is whether they got the immunity, whether they got it in the first, second, third. And when the Omicron came, it probably got to so many South Africans that they produced something called a natural immunity. And the second factor that's playing for the world, the vaccine immunity, the supplementing it when people are getting vaccine which recognizes the virus not in its linear form, just the Omicron alone, which is a natural immune system response. It takes the whole coronavirus family properly and builds an immune system around it. And that is not allowing the virus to mutate that freely because it's not finding a human body that easily where it can sit and hide, because as it enters, the body recognizes this virus and kills it. But what we have to remember is it will still find some human genetics. It will still find bodies which will not be able to defeat this virus and give this virus an opportunity to sit, hide, and mutate. And that's what we're watching. And the last part is, which is not in the strength part, but a weakness for us is the issue that the original coronavirus, the alpha wave, the beta wave that causes the second wave, the delta that causes the third wave, these were highly virulent variants. They still remain around us. And they are still producing and mutating somewhere down the world in some human body. And what the scientist needs to watch, and the word of caution will always be, is what we need to watch is those variants which will be different, which will not be this Omicron, which might be totally different from Delta, coming out from one of these offsprings which were highly virulent. Will they become a virus of a mutation that not only it escapes our immune system because of its change in color, but it also becomes more pathogenic or more virulent, which is where the world needs to watch. And that's where the only caution remains. We pray that this tames down like the way it has done with Omicron, and the future mutations will keep taming down, but it's not a guarantee. And that is what the world and the scientific world will keep watching now.
So just speaking of vaccination, Professor, there's a damning report doing the rounds about the reported side effects brought on by the use of the Pfizer vaccine. Any comments on this?
I just want to inform you that there's been a recent study, in fact, just last 2 weeks, published in Lancet. It's one of the most reputable scientific journal in the world, a very major study. In fact, such monitoring and surveillance has never been done in the previous history of our human mankind till human knows, done in the United States predominantly on this Pfizer and specifically this messenger RNA, which is predominantly the bigger vaccine the world has seen and are taken. And what it has clearly shown is that all side effects, and side effects will happen. Why it happens is because when you inject an antigen or inject anything which is a dummy virus or something, it is bound to produce an immune response because our body is recognizing this new thing that has been put into your body so that it can defeat it quickly before this takes over our body. It's a fight that happens with the immune system and this dead virus or a messenger RNA that we have circulated, which we call it as an antigen. This is done to produce an immune system. And that small mild infection. So what the study has shown is that 20% of the public has shown headaches, 16% fever, 17% fatigue, 16% chills, and 15% pain. And it lasts not more than 2 days. That's all is the mild infection. All these symptoms, if you look at fatigue, pain, look at fever, look at chills, is because your body is trying to fight this new antigen that we have produced, which we have produced purposely so that the body jacks up our immune system to recognize this enemy called coronavirus. And now they studied the 4,500 deaths that happened, which was predominantly above the age of 60, and the deaths that were linked somewhere down to the vaccine. And clearly, as per the Lancet, which is very, very highly scientific, reputable study journal, has clearly indicated none of these deaths had any correlation with the vaccine in general. So I think these symptoms are mild. These symptoms are bound to happen because you have injected a dummy virus for your body to recognize and build an immune system, but they last maximum 2 days. So we still believe vaccination is a very important mechanism. So there are 3 basic tools we know now which fights and prevents coronavirus. One is ventilation. Be in open spaces, make sure windows are open. Ventilation helps. It's an airborne disease. Masks in close congregation, when it's crowded, when you're close to each other, it will help. And when places are less ventilated. And third thing is vaccination, because it helps you jack up your natural immunity. The immune system does come down, Sakina, with time. In anything, when you are dealing with any viruses or any bacteria or any infection, your immune system with time do start falling down. Similarly, the vaccine immunity also starts falling down. But what we call it as the first line, second and third line, whereas maybe the first line starts falling down, the second line, but third line still remains intact. And what does vaccine and natural immunity jointly do is build the 3-tier system to such a strength level that even when your infection comes, even though the virus might escape for a while, you might have a small infection, we call it a breakthrough, but your immune system will eventually be able to overpower this viral load. And that's what we are looking in vaccines in general.
And hopefully we'll have time to talk a little bit more about this at a later stage, Prof, also about booster shots and the like. But that's our time for today. Professor Ramneek Ahluwalia, health expert and CEO of Higher Health. Always a pleasure speaking to you.